Hello, Endeavor here. So we're back for another episode of Classic Movies tonight. I'm here with Morgoth again. How are you doing tonight, Morgoth?
Good. I'm a little bit cold actually. I was having an afternoon nap and I've woke up. It's like a crisp autumn day, and I've woke up and I'm I don't know. I've got like a cold chill in my spine. I'm all wrapped up. I feel like a bit of a puff because it's not that cold at all. But I am. I'm just getting old, which is probably going to tie into some of the themes of this movie and the era and whatnot.
Yeah, it probably will. So tonight we're going to be talking about Black Hawk Down. So it's Ridley Scott's 2001 war drama. And, you may not consider this to be a classic movie. What's the cutoff? Is the year 2000 the cutoff for classic? I wanted to choose this one because I really feel that it's culturally relevant to today. And it's become so much more the relevant in the past couple of days. I thought about this about choosing this film about a month ago, but it turns out that it was the perfect choice because of everything that's gone on in the Middle East in the last couple of days. We'll get onto that later. But so if anyone hasn't seen the movie, it's a pretty straightforward movie. It's not very plot heavy. So it's about the U.S. military operations in Somalia in 1993. So it's based around the Battle of Mogadishu, so a raid which the U.S. Special Forces pulled off in 1993. In that year, there was a civil war going on in Somalia, which resulted in a famine, and there was a warlord named Mohammed Farah Adid who had taken power in Mogadishu and portions of the country. And the backdrop of the movie is that this guy's basically seizing food, international aid relief from the UN, and he's causing a famine, and that's what prompted the U.S. to get involved. And I want to also say, I don't want to get bogged down in the historical technicalities because we are mostly talking about the film, not exactly the historical details. But so anyway, President Bill Clinton authorized a mission to deploy Delta Force and the U.S. Army Rangers into Adid-controlled territory in Mogadishu in order to capture him and members of his government. So they planned this raid, and this raid was supposed to be quick and only last about an hour or so. About 150 or so U.S. soldiers were going to rope down into this market in Mogadishu, capture the guy and members of his government, and they were going to be out of there. And the whole operation was only designed to last about an hour or so. So when it happened, it didn't go as smoothly as they had planned it. The U.S. forces were confronted by the Somali militia, and they suffered several casualties, several wounded, and 2 helicopters were shot down in the city. So what they had to do was they had to change it from a simple prisoner extraction mission into a rescue mission for the crews of the helicopters who had been shot down. And a further, I think it was 3,000 U.S. troops were committed to this operation. So it greatly expanded in size, and it basically resulted in this massive battle throughout Mogadishu, with this big clash between the U.S. forces and the Somali militia. And it pretty much resulted in dozens of casualties on the U.S. side, and probably a couple hundred. I think they probably took out a couple hundred of the Somali militia, but it was pretty much a big disaster for the United States military because it turned into this huge battle. It was supposed to be this quick operation, which only lasted a couple of hours. Ended up being much bigger than anyone had anticipated. And then after this botched operation, the U.S. Bill Clinton eventually withdrew U.S. forces from Somalia, and they weren't successful at capturing this General Adid guy. So, I mean, I guess the first thing that that's worth pointing out about this movie is, how many times have we has America gone through this kind of story? It's almost like this guy Adid, whatever. It could just be any generic Muslim name, and it's like, well, America wants to stop. Choose like 3 Muslim names out of a hat. Mohammed, Farah, Adid. And then which country, throw a dart at the map on the wall. Oh, it's Somalia. And it just feels like it's something which you've lived that we've lived through time and time again. America tries to depose this third world dictator. It turns into a disaster, and they don't end up actually turning said country into the United States 2.0. So, I mean, that's the first thing to note about it, is that it's almost like it doesn't really matter what the country is or who the guy is, because we've been through this story so many times.
It's kind of like this kind of futile white man's burden to bring the world, bring liberal democracy and capitalism to the whole world. And it just doesn't seem to take hold. It just can't manage to pull it off, because it's well, what is it that they say now? Civilization is incommunicable is the thing. So it's this is the latest in a long line of like Americans going into some forgotten part of the world and failing to bring liberal democracy in. I mean, I think it's the interesting thing about Black Hawk Down, though, is that it's made, of course, in the year that 9/11 happened. I would say that it would probably. I've just been looking at the Wikipedia page. It would have had to been in production and given the green light before that would happen, unless you wanted to get into some sort of conspiracy take. But I don't really see the point in that. And it's set in 1993. And that was a bit of a good age. During the 90s, you tend not to see that many war movies. Actually, there's one or two here or there, but the previous era of war movies was the 80s, when you had the late 70s with Apocalypse Now, and then you had the Deer Hunter, and then you get into the 80s, and the 80s is chock a block with like Vietnam War movies and retrospectives on the Vietnam War. But then when you get into the 90s, there doesn't tend to be that much, because there wasn't an immediate war. Well, there was the Gulf War, but for whatever reason, the first one. But then for whatever reason, there just wasn't that many war movies. Weren't a big thing so much in the 90s, and I think it's because it was a much more cynical, carefree era. Even though this happened in 1993, nobody really cared. It wasn't really much of a thing. I was a teenager at the time. And so this, when it came out in 2001, I thought it was a bit of an oddity, and I watched it at the time, and even then I was like, it just sort of, I watched it, I thought it was okay, and then I just kind of forgot about it. It didn't kind of sink into my consciousness or anything. And you look at it now, when you're 20 odd years, because what was about to happen when this came out was the whole war on terror thing, where that kind of scenario would play itself out over and over again, all over the Middle East and Afghanistan and everything. And now, like literally to the day, where you see it could be like prescient again, which is. It was weird, because I was thinking it's a bit of an odd film to pick, but then after the events of this week, I was thinking, well, yeah, here we go. It is something to be said about it.
Yeah, so what I find interesting about this movie, and kind of how I kind of view it, I view it differently now than I would have when I originally saw it. Now, I didn't see it when I was young. I would have been kind of a young child when it came out, probably only around 6 years old or so. But I saw it, I would say, probably around 2006, maybe 2007 or so. And I basically just viewed that as this is contemporary. So, it came out in 2001. That would have only been a few years prior. 1993 was not that far off. It was a couple of years before I was born. But nonetheless, it kind of just seemed to me to be something that was set in the present day. Whereas I think now, especially after 2021 and the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, this can kind of be viewed in more of a historical context. And I think that you can look at the decade between 1991 to 2001, so the fall of the Soviet Union to 9/11. This kind of is the heyday of the American empire. So following the fall of the USSR and the end of communism, the U.S. was the hegemonic geopolitical superpower in the world. Francis, 1 year prior to the events that are depicted in the film, in 1992, Francis Fukuyama predicted that he declared, he didn't really predict, he declared that we had reached the end of history, that Western liberal democracy and free market capitalism was the highest form of human development, and that all that was going to happen now was that this system would spread across the globe. So it was only a matter of time before the entire world was westernized, Americanized, and they adopted this free market capitalism. There would be trade throughout the world. Everyone would eventually reach the standard of living that the United States and Western Europe had attained. And that's kind of the projection that he had for the future. And you can see in the context of something like in the context of something like the Battle of Mogadishu and the American operations in Somalia, you do see that this is kind of the thing that they're trying to bring about. So I'm gonna say a bit more about the time period before I get into that. There was an idea at the time that Americanism was not only the best way of life, but that America had a duty to bring Americanism to the world and by military force if need be. And then we also have to consider that this movie came out in 2001. So this was, I think it came out in December. So this would have been like 2 months before 9/11. And obviously that's not possible that, I don't think it's possible that they could have predicted that the movie would have been in production before that. And it seemed that, they were going to be headed off onto a bunch of more disastrous excursions like the film depicted. And at the time, Americanism was very appealing. So it offered wealth, safety, freedom, and many in the world, such as the former Eastern Bloc, they were very eager to embrace Americanism. And there was this fascination with American pop culture. You can call it Coca-Cola and blue jeans nationalism, or MTV and apple pie and baseball nationalism, or whatever you want to call it. A lot of people around the world were really fascinated by this kind of Americanism, and I think that that's what this film really does represent. This kind of point at which the American empire had basically reached its height, and since then we've seen its downfall. Well, not complete downfall, but decline. We've seen it rapidly decline since then. And so the other thing and for this this operation in particular, and then what we'd see later in Afghanistan and Iraq, it's all underpinned by the idea of this kind of universalist egalitarianism that America has the perfect system, this liberal democracy and free market capitalism, that it's their duty to bring it to the world, that will go off, and with the right system, Somalia will one day resemble America if they're given liberal democracy. And well, we've clearly seen that hasn't been the case. But I feel that this film really does represent the height of American power in the world.
I mean, one of the things that I noticed about this, which is different to the earlier Vietnam War movies, is that in the earlier ones, the sort of the power structure of the army, like a lot of the captains, they all speak in this like technical language, and it's I mean, the most famous example of that would be the drill instructor in Full Metal Jacket. But he's kind of a professional doing a job, but he also comes across as unhinged and psychotic. And in this one, you see that you've got the soldiers themselves, and they are just a bunch of good boys from the South, mainly there to do a job, and they're all wholesome and they're all decent. But then in the 90s, this kind of technical way of talking and behaving in the military, it was seen as a good thing, and it was presented as these highly capable men who you always wanted on your team, who were always cool under fire. I mean, I actually think the best, just to get into the movie a bit, the best example of this in the movie is Tom Sizemore. I think he carries the movie. He was a great actor, and he does that thing perfectly where one of the soldiers is saying like, "I'm shot," and he says, "Well, everybody's shot. Just get on with it." And it's all about this kind of professionalism and keeping your head under fire, which is in complete contrast to the more boomer era sort of Vietnam War stuff where everybody was a psychotic or a coward, or everything was going to hell and nobody knew what was going on. In this, it's like much more sort of this technocratic behemoth has gone to war, and it's all these well-greased, well-oiled moving parts that you never want to get on the wrong side of. And what's happened here is that there's a spanner being thrown in the works because the helicopter went down in this like Mad Max kind of shithole, and then it's like, well, they have to adapt themselves to the situation and stuff. And it's I mean, somebody in the chat mentioned it's trying to present a failure as a sort of patriotic success. And yeah, I think that's part of the patriotic package, to be honest. There's a lot of cope in it to say, well, it was a disaster, and the third world got the better of you. But you get these kind of sort of emotional words at the end about what a hero is, and we'll all go back as heroes individually in ourselves. And the Eric Barner's in it, he's good as well in this, and he's like, oh, the normies wouldn't get it, I'm going back out there. There's all of this kind of thing going on. It's like, because they eventually the caravan, they get back to safety. And then it's like, well, are you going to go back out? We need all the boots on the ground. And it's like, yeah, of course I'm going to go back out. And you just look at the lieutenant or whatever, like dirt. Of course I'm going to go back out. So it's all presented as this like professional, you'll take anybody on. Everything's positive about it, which is in stark contrast to the earlier ones. And it's also a little bit kind of odd for a Gen X movie. Like, the main actors in it are my age. And when it happens, I would have been a teenager. So you've got like that 10-year gap. And it's kind of like, well, I would say it's a real Gen X movie because you get the millennials coming in 2000, 2001. But the Gen X stuff's normally marked with this kind of cynicism and irony. And there's none of that in this, which is strange because, again, it was a decade where war wasn't really a big thing. There wasn't much talk of it. It was mainly a positive thing. So all in all, it's a bit of an oddity of a movie, I think.
Yeah, and I guess in contrast to a lot of the stuff you'd see surrounding Vietnam, with most of the movies that you'd see in the 70s and 80s about the Vietnam War, there's always the sense that it's a misguided adventure. It's a war that America shouldn't be fighting in, and they're forcing men to go off and die, and nobody wants to be there. And as you mentioned, like the officers are all psychotic, they're all psychopaths, and the poor Vietnamese are poor victims of the evil white man who's going off there by the imperialists who are racist at home and everything like that. You get that sense with a lot of the stuff from the Vietnam War movies. Not saying that I think that the Vietnam War was a good idea for the United States. I definitely don't think that was the case. However, you see like how the ground that the left really gained through Vietnam, it was huge culturally. But with this movie, you don't really see any of that. So all the guys, you imagine them that they probably have a wife and kids at home. There are these cool, righteous guys. They probably take their son to baseball practice. Maybe they have some burgers on the barbecue on the weekend. It's this thing that I call kind of apple pie and baseball nationalism. It's actually this kind of positive view of Americanism. That's something you definitely don't see you definitely don't see that in the movies about Vietnam, because that's a war that a lot it's been used as a condemnation of Americanism a lot more than this operation in Somalia, or I guess also probably a lot more than the subsequent Iraq and Afghanistan wars. We can get into how the perception of that has changed, but this one you don't see as much of that.
You think of something like Platoon with William Dafoe, like they're using their guns as bongs. Everybody's walking around with a bottle of Jack Daniels. They're all stoned. They're all drunk. They're all high. It's just like they're a complete and utter wreck. Almost as if they've kind of spiritually died. Whereas in the American army, as presented in Black Hawk Downs, are much more slick and professional and up to date, like military machine with none of that nonsense in it.
Yeah, and then the other thing to point out is that in contrast to what would come later, the army is like the task force is entirely male. They're overwhelmingly white, and it does feel like it's like America is still actually a coherent nation, which you definitely wouldn't get that. You definitely wouldn't get that today. So you still kind of see you still kind of see a white America as the dominant force. Now, this is definitely after the definitely after the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s and the Jewish takeover of that decade. But it's before the rot really set in. So the American military still seemed like an extremely competent force, even though this movie is about a military disaster that they were caught up in. You still get the sense that that the military are a force to be reckoned with in this movie. Yeah. So the other thing that's important to note is because they touch on this a bit in the movie. So the sergeant, the main guy, he's played by what's his name, Josh Hartnett. Yeah. So his character's name is Eversman. I don't know if he was a real person or not, but so he's kind of, they have this scene at the beginning where he's talking about how he respects the Somalis. So in the movie, they call them the skinnies, which I think is quite funny. And we can get into that aspect later. But you see that he goes on this spiel that he says, well, these people are poor, they have nothing, and they really just need a chance. They need to be lifted up out of their poverty. And, our mission here, we're here to help them out of their squalor and bring about the ideal of America to Somalia. So there's so much of that that kind of captures so much of the American foreign policy of the late 20th century and of the early 21st century, and which we still see a lot of today, really. In that is the assumption that it's possible in the first place that you could make Somalia into America, that was with just the right systems, with the right economy, with education, and with liberal democracy and transparency. If you have all of that in place, well, then Somalia is going to just be like America. It's going to be just as prosperous as America, except everyone will have a different color skin, and but it's going to be a society on equal par to that of Western societies. First of all, that assumption's in there, because if you don't believe that, well, then the entire mission is going to be fruitless, because it's going to end up the way that it is, regardless. But secondly, is also the assumption that not only is it possible to do that, but that America and the West have a duty to bring that about in countries like Somalia, so that to just leave them alone in their squalor would be amoral. That we have this great gift of Western liberal democracy and free market capitalism, and we need to bring it to the world. And really, I mean, that is the toxic recipe which has led America on all these disastrous foreign wars, and which we still see today. But they do touch on that a bit, though, because there is the scene where the pilot Durant is captured by he's one of the pilots of one of the Blackhawks, which crashes, and for whatever reason the Somali militia decide to take him alive. And while he's in captivity, there's a Somali militiaman who says to him, well, what are you expecting? Do you expect that if you just kill this guy Adid, if you just kill him, Somalis are just going to put down their weapons and adopt Western democracy? And he says that killing is Somalia's form of negotiation. And basically what he's saying is what the West considers barbarism is what Somalis just consider their way of life. And deposing this one warlord is not going to change that. And well, I mean, all of that has definitely come into fruition in the last couple of decades since.
Yeah, he also says that Americans live long, boring lives, whereas in Somalia it'll be. I mean, the implication is that they are living this with this sort of. I don't want to cause trouble, but this kind of Bronze Age mindset, if you wanted to put it that way.
Yeah.
And earlier on, which apparently isn't accurate, so I get it. But earlier on, this has been a discussion on the internet this week. But whatever. Um, Earlier on, they're in the helicopters and they're flying along over the like a beach, and what the two of the soldiers are having a conversation, and they're saying like. They're saying like they're looking at the sea and it's a beautiful sea, it's a beautiful surf. They've got like great beaches. He says, but then when you actually get down on the ground, it's a different story. And the other soldier says, yeah, it is a different story. I actually think that's one of the best moments in the film because it's very nicely shot. But it's also the way like Ridley Scott's like shot the beach and shot it looks like California or somewhere. I mean, even California is not California anymore, but it does look like somewhere that you'd want to go on holiday, except it's a hellhole. It's like the worst place you could go on earth. And it just sort of brings that point home that, yeah, the landscape may look nice, you may have nice beaches, but the people have made it absolutely cancerous. And on the sort of the little back and forth where he says, well, Americans lead long, boring lives, but Somalians, like, we're in it for the moment, and we're in it for, like, we're this kind of warrior class, or, you know, we're I mean, look, it is a fine line when you end up into this kind of Nietzscheanism, where it's like, if there's no morality anymore, except this sort of you shoot your enemies and claim their women and all of this, like, it's a fine line in my view. But the point of it is, he's kind of saying like, it's never going to work that way. But also that the Somalia way is better. Like the American lives are long and boring. We are like really full of vitality and dynamism. That's pretty much what he said. And I just think I just reject that. I'd still rather live in America. Like,
Oh yeah, 100%.
if I had the choice, I would still enjoy like having a nice suburban house in America with a boring garden where I had a pension plan and all of this, you know, like all of this. The sort of this, I'd still choose the soulless consumerism over that. And I find I always get queasy when I hear takes on the right where they're kind of lionizing that kind of thing. I don't get it.
Yeah, and one thing that you see in the film, and this is something that I actually like, is that they portray the Somalis. What I would imagine, I mean, I've never fought in a military campaign in Somalia, but what I imagine would be accurate because, and what you can see on the Wikipedia page is they're absolutely screaming about, oh my God, how racist the portrayal of the Somalis is. So one thing that they do show is that there is this really stark contrast between the U.S. forces and the Somali forces. So with the American troops, again, like it's important to point out that these are Western. This is a Western force. These are European men. These are white men. Almost all of them are white, and all of them are male. There are a couple of Black Americans here and there, but it's predominantly a white force. They're highly well trained, highly skilled. Very disciplined. There's that scene where I'll get onto that in a second. So they have this extremely methodical way of fighting and combat. They employ cutting edge military technology like these helicopters, night vision, Humvees, these rifles, sniper rifles, and it's just this high tech out the yin yang, precision skill, extremely a high amount of training, and this is well, it's a cutting edge force, to say the least. And while the force is extremely competent, they also have this humanitarian warrior creed towards both their own and their enemies. So one theme of the movie, which is really important for this event, is that they say we leave no man behind. So that if one American soldier has been captured or killed or is in duress, well then they all have the duty to go in and help him, and everyone comes home, whether dead or alive. And they even put additional troops in and lose additional lives to adhere to this principle. So I'll contrast that with the Somalis first. So I should also mention though that they also have this idea, this doctrine that they won't fire unless fired upon, and they're very conscientious about avoiding harming non-combatants such as women and children. So in contrast, the Somali militia, they're totally disorganized. They're basically like savages. Their strategy is really to just overwhelm the superior U.S. force with just sheer numbers. What you see, they even say that here that generally speaking, Somalis can't shoot for shit. The American forces called them the skinnies, and they basically just run straight at them, firing an AK-47 from the hip with extremely poor aim, just hoping that it hits someone, not taking cover at all. And there's basically this total disregard for life, really. So they don't care. Well, first of all, they don't seem to be either very concerned about or very capable of preserving their own lives. But they also really, a lot of them couldn't seem to really care less about their own dying. So it's not like they're going to stop and help another Somali who gets shot. You see constantly that the U.S. forces call for a medic. So when one guy gets hit, they call a medic over there. They get someone there immediately to try to cure his injuries or maybe even save his life. Whereas the Somalis have none of that. They just run straight down. They just run straight into enemy fire. And then when they actually end up killing an American soldier, they drag them through the streets and tear the body apart. And it's just total it's just total barbarism. So there's a scene which really illustrates this kind of contrast and ethos between these two fighting forces. There's a scene when the U.S. soldiers, so the first Black Hawk has crashed, and then the forces who were there to extract the prisoners, they have to get to the crash site because they need to check to see if those guys are still alive, and if they are, if they're alive, they have to rescue them. If they're dead, they have to recover the bodies. And there's a scene where it shows overhead both the Somali militia and the U.S. forces marching down parallel streets towards the crash site. And you see the American soldiers all checking their corners, marching with their rifles pointed forwards, ready for action. Whoever, if any window opens and there's a guy there, he's going to get shot immediately. And you just see the Somalis just marching down the street with it's just this huge crowd of people. They said even women and children were with their crowd, and there's no training whatsoever. It's just some random guy with an AK-47 in his hand, just charging at the enemy and hoping to hit something with by firing from the hip. And the entire operation really was the result of this kind of humanitarian ethos, because what really got the U.S. turned this battle into this disaster was the rescue mission. So when these two helicopters had been shot down, the rescue mission to go save the crew of these helicopters, this is what forced them to commit so many troops, and this is what got so many guys killed, where most of the occupants of the helicopters had already died. They were already dead upon impact. There were a couple of survivors, but for the most part, it was a fruitless mission. But it was all inspired by this ethos of leave no man behind, and this very humanitarian ethos. Whereas, and that's basically what turned this into a big battle and caused a lot of the casualties. But you do see this really stark contrast between the westernized American forces and the barbaric Somali militia.
I mean, there is a touch of hubris in that, isn't there? Where a bunch of your fellas go down, and you'll just kind of you'll have as a code of conduct that, well, you'll just be able to go in and get them. You'll just shoot your way in and shoot your way back out and get them, rather than just sort of acknowledge the fact that they're dead. I think that's kind of interesting, because, as you say, if it doesn't work out, you're going to have to sort of commit more and more troops to them. But it really is there's a thing that goes around about Saving Private Ryan, where because it's like a Steven Spielberg thing, and this time it's Germans and Americans, and it's World War II. And the Rob Yeager did this, and I did an old blog post on it, based on his observations on it, with some thoughts of my own. And it's where the German soldiers are much older. They've got skinheads, like they're in their late 30s. They've got skinheads. They're bigger. They're more weathery looking. Whereas the American boys are sort of, it's Matt Damon when he was young. He's got like a blonde mop, and when the American ones get shot, they scream and writhe around in pain. And when the Germans get shot, nothing happens. And I thought it's actually given that even in 2001 we were pretty politically correct, but even then, Ridley Scott's kind of flipped that on its head. Or kind of done that again, but this time it's Somalians. Now, all right, we're all going to have our views on Somalians, but it really is is it the case where they just wouldn't care? Like they do come across just like a sort of zombie horde compared to the Americans. So when the Americans get shot, once again, you see in gory detail, the medics are there, and there's bullets whizzing by left, right, and center, and they're trying to get the drips in the arms and all of this. They're crying over their friends. And when the Somalians have been like a Somalian, two or three Somalians can get shot and go to the floor, and the one that's left standing, he doesn't even turn around and look. Like there's no acknowledgement whatsoever. And I thought it's because I sound like a libtard when I'm saying it, but I'm kind of just being objective here. Like, would they be like that? Would they just not even turn around and think, "Oh no, Ahmed has just dropped to the floor with his arm hanging off"? And they're really blown to bits as well. There's a bit when Eric Bana gets behind some kind of like huge, powerful machine gun that they've been using, and then like one of the captains of the militia turns around and he looks shocked, and it's like a Rambo 2 scene where he just blows to pieces. And the way that it's filmed and shot is deliberately so that the audience will be like, yes. You know what I mean? And I just think, like, I'm surprised he got away with this. Even in 2001, I'm surprised he got away with this. But like, it's controversial to say it, but would they be like that in real life? Like,
I don't know. I mean, judging by the state of their society, I don't find it to be unbelievable.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know either way. I just think it's an interesting thing to think about. Like, yeah, they are going to be used to death. Life is cheap for them. It really is.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned like the hubris, kind of, that they have to commit more troops into the battle to save the guys who crashed in the helicopter, if they're even still alive to begin with, and that's what ends up causing making the operation a real disaster, because dozens of I think that the actual casualty, the amount that U.S. soldiers that died in the battle, I read it was 19, but then some places say it was 18, so it was around 19 or so. But a lot of that would have been because they committed so many forces to extracting the crews that had crashed in the first helicopter, which was shot down. So there is that kind of, like you mentioned, the kind of hubris that we can't leave anyone behind because that's against our kind of humanitarian creed, and then you commit more. That really encapsulates a lot of the American foreign policy in places like Somalia to begin with. That we must do something about it. We must do something to make this third world hellhole a better place, or else when we're just abandoning them, and then a bunch of your people get killed, you cause a big disaster, the country ends up worse off than it was to begin with. So you kind of see that this it's a bit of this naivety, really, of that you're going to be able to find the best solution for everyone, and if you just try hard enough, well, then everyone's gonna go home happy, and have their white picket fence and their golden retriever, when that really just isn't going to happen. And it clearly hasn't happened.
I mean, I would say as well, I mentioned some of the Vietnam War movies before, and like there was one bit where I kind of cringed where they were taking off in the helicopters, and it's ever since like Apocalypse Now. It's where you've got the American armies going up in helicopters, and you have to have some kind of rock song. I don't know if it's a sort of an inside wink, but it is like a movie cliche. And I thought, well, okay, we're going to get a rock song here. It could at least be Guns N' Roses or Nirvana, but it wasn't. It was Jimi Hendrix. I forgot the one with the, obviously with the guitar solo at the beginning. But was it? I'm standing next to a mountain. That one. What's that one? I forgot. The Voodoo Child, is it? Or Voodoo Child or something. At any rate, it was like a Jimi Hendrix track, and I thought, well, we're in the 90s. This is 1993. It should be Guns N' Roses or Pearl Jam or Nirvana or Alice in Chains. I mean, and I just thought it's like this is like a Vietnam War movie now, but it's supposed to be in 1993, and we're not getting like the 90s soundtrack. But having said that, there was some decent enough 90s sort of nostalgia stuff in there for me. Especially when you dig out the ones that you really don't hear on the radio anymore. Like I listen to stuff like Absolute 90s, where I'm used to it. But there was a really great Faith No More song came on when they were in the barracks at the start. And I was like, oh, I haven't heard that for ages. That's class. That, like, I'm gonna hunt that out on YouTube. And I just thought I would, you know, as a kind of Gen X 90s kid, I would have preferred a bit more sort of not just doing the boomer thing over again with some of the scenes where it was obviously like I've got the soundtrack up here, and some of the other ones are like Ashes to Ashes from David Bowie was in there as well. Like again, that's not that's not 90s.
The only one that I remember was Suspicious Minds by Elvis Presley.
Yeah, they even had a bit of Elvis in there, and if I'm honest, I think they would all, if it, in reality in 1993, I'm pretty sure that they would have all been listening to the music that was like out at that time, and there was some great stuff out there as well. But that's what I'm saying. It's kind of like, well, it's a war movie. We've got helicopters in it, so we're going to have to do 60s music. We're back in Vietnam again. It's just that the race of the people we're going to shoot's different. I mean, that's another contrast, to be honest, because we're in Vietnam War movies, like the men in the black pajamas, they can actually shoot. They're like in war movies, because we're talking cliche and stereotypes here, and you know we're in the far right, so it's all right. The men in the black pajamas in like Vietnam War movies, they're actually what is it they say on the Big Lebowski? They're a worthy adversary. They're highly organized, and they know all kinds of sneaky little tricks to get you out. So, they've got like networks of tunnels, and their attacks are clever and coordinated and, you know, strategic and tactical. They were very good in the movies. They were a worthy opponent. Whereas here, it's just like the White Walkers from Game of Thrones. It's just sheer weight of numbers, and they don't care how many you wipe out. And I just think that's telling. I just think that's that's what would they call that? The critical race theory. They would call that unconscious racism.
Is it really unconscious though? Like, let's be honest.
White gaze or something like that.
Yeah. Hey, compared to the shit that we get today, I'll take it. I'll take Zulu taking place in 1993. Yeah,
that's what it is.
I'm never gonna complain about that. It is. Yeah.
People, the most requested movie that we've ever had, which I shied away from because I thought it would be a channel killer, was Zulu. But and I know why. I know why everybody was like, "Oh, you got to do Zulu. You got to do Zulu." But I'll be honest, like this is closer to the Black Hawk Down is closer to the bone than Zulu ever gets.
Yeah.
That because in Zulu, in Zulu, the Zulus are depicted as kind of honorable. Like they are they you know there's a kind of bravery to them. They've got this sort of primitivism, but it's kind of reified. It's sort of like they are a noble. Well, I'm not going to say it, but they are a noble creature, if you want to put it that way, for YouTube. Whereas there's nothing noble about the Somali militia and Black Hawk Down, like nothing at all.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to do Zulu eventually in the future. I just felt that, like, we had already done quite a few about the British Empire, but maybe, since it's been a while since we've done one of those, we can do that one sometime soon. But yeah, I do always love movies like that. It's a group of, well, European soldiers outnumbered by hordes of savages, and they have to fend them off. So Black Hawk Down is one of those. Zulu is one of those, and then I think you even mentioned in one of your videos that Helm's Deep, the Battle of Helm's Deep in Lord of the Rings, was kind of based on Zulu. So it was inspired by like this, a group of let's be honest, white soldiers being outnumbered by these hordes of non-white soldiers who are not quite as civilized as them, so to say for YouTube.
In movie making terms, the trick is with a good battle scene it's like the build up. It's the prelude to the battle is really important. So with Zulu and the Lord of the Rings, the second film, the Two Towers, is like he just mapped that whole thing where by the time the battle starts, everybody's on the edge of their seat because it's all about, we can't, there's too many, we can't handle this. In Zulu, you've got that. I think he's like a Swedish pastor of some sort, and he's running around. He's totally black pilled, and he's like, "What are you going to do? You're going to slaughter your fellow man, and you can't win. We're all we're all going to die." And it's funny when you look at how the Swedes turned out in the end. Is like this pasta cook, but in this one. And they did that on Two Towers as well. So by the time that the first shots fired, the first arrow is loosed or knocked, you're really on the edge of your seat. You're like, well, Christ, this is going to be epic. But it's different on Black Hawk Down because they get dropped into the action. If you know what I mean, they go to the problem. They are the invaders.
Yeah, I would say that the scene for that is either, the scene where Orlando Bloom's character Blackburn, he was like meant to be an 18-year-old kid. I will say that Orlando Bloom and Ewan McKellen, I like Ewan McKellen. Orlando Bloom's not bad, but their American accents are dreadful. You can tell that they're so forced.
Ewan McGregor,
sorry. I was sorry. Ewan McGregor, yeah. Their American accents are dreadful, but I mean, I do like Ewan McGregor a lot as an actor. But so the first scene where the first sign of something going wrong is that so Sergeant Everson and his men are in this helicopter. They're roping down into the city to capture the officials who their mission is to capture. Then someone fires an RPG at the helicopter. It has to swerve to avoid it. And then this 18-year-old kid falls, maybe 20 meters or so, and he breaks his neck. He does survive, but it kind of has like slow motion scene. So you see the sergeant looking down, seeing the young private falling. And now he knows that, well, this operation has just gotten a lot more difficult. And then there's also the scene when the first Black Hawk gets shot down. So they have it crashing, and then it goes to the command post, and it says, "We have a Black Hawk down." I repeat, "We have a Black Hawk down." And this would have been at the time like everybody's heart would have dropped at the time because they realized that, well, this operation is not going to go as smoothly as we had planned it. Somebody asked in the chat, "Is this a dig at the command structure?" I would say it isn't, because I don't really ever get the sense in the movie that that there's anything wrong with the command structure. So the general Garrison, he he seems very concerned about his men when he realizes that the operation is not going to go off so smoothly. He does get a sense of dread, and then the guys up in the air, the officers that are circling around the city in the helicopter for the entire movie, they also seem to have kind of be filled with dread once they realize things are not going to go as smoothly as possible. I don't it could be seen as that the operation didn't go as well as they had hoped, but I don't think it really showed anything as an indictment against the command structure, and I didn't really see it as a commentary on the military as you would see in something like All Quiet on the Western Front, which definitely is.
If they when they set things like that up, they'll usually have like a sane man who's saying, well, this is a bad idea, this could go wrong, and then it'll be the person who's in the authority position will be the one who's ignoring the advice and who's overruling them, and then in the end the more modest and humble person, officer or politician or whoever it happens to be, will be vindicated in the long run. But there wasn't really anything like that. It was all like professionals trying to do their best in a bad situation.
Yeah, someone else put it in the chat. No, I wouldn't have been around at the time, but they said that conservative media at the time lost its mind on Bill Clinton. I can imagine, yeah. So the blame would have been laid on the feet of the president, and I know that he eventually withdrew the American forces from Somalia shortly after. You even see though in the movie that the general at the end he's walking through the tent where all of the wounded are being held, and you see him like get a cloth and then wipe up some of the blood that's on the ground. So you never get the sense that this guy's a bad guy, and he really does. You get the sense that he realizes that, well, shit, I have there's a big disaster and it's on my hands, and I need to figure out what I'm going to do. So I don't feel like it's an attack on him per se. But yeah, they kind of do at the end try to spin what was really a disaster kind of as something that was actually heroic, which, again, it's it was, this was before Iraq and Afghanistan. So I don't know if they could have used that as I don't know if you could argue that this was that it was, simply just a recruitment advertisement. Perhaps it functioned like that. I mean, just imagine this movie coming out just after 9/11, and America at the time was really swept up in this patriotic frenzy following 9/11. I talked about this in one of my recent videos. The movement that brought us the infamous freedom fries. Did you ever hear about that?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
So, so America was swept up into this patriotic frenzy following 9/11, and I'm sure that for audiences at the end of 2001, this must have just been right up their alley. But I mean, I don't know. What was maybe you can answer. What was it like that in Britain, or were you really not in tune with that
after 9/11?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. We're going to war. Tony Blair came. It was everybody was all in. Like, this is it. This is the big one. It was the liberal world order is under attack by terrorists, the networks of terrorists all over the world. And Tony Blair came out and said something like, the pieces on the chessboard are all moving. They're in flux or something like this in one of these typical sort of Tony Blair type speeches. And it was a case, and I'm going to admit it, like, I was at the time, I was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's go for them. Let's hit them. Let's kick some ass. I mean, the funny thing is, I'll come to that in a minute. Just on the movie itself, before we sort of go off on get the meta in. One of the things that I wanted to bring up was did you notice when they were looking at the helicopter? Is that like from a satellite image they had when they were back in the barracks where the general was?
I think so. Yeah.
Or some like really high airplane or a satellite image of the airplane? And they did it where you could actually see, so you could see where the helicopter was with the pilot in. Then you could also see there was like sort of lights. They were like sort of splodges, so you could see all of the Somalians gradually moving towards them along the streets. And and that's actually, I was thinking, where have I seen that before? I've seen that before in some other movie. And then I realized it was in Aliens 2. And in Aliens 2, they've got these transponder things that detect movement or something. And so it's this horrifying thing, because you can see there's like these green splodges, and there's hundreds of them, and they know the aliens are moving closer and closer towards them, and there's like a high-pitched noise, like a high-pitched beep, and the closer they get, the faster the beep gets. So it's great movie making, because if you're really getting, you really got feeling the tension. And they, I just thought that it was a funny thing, because Ridley Scott had basically ripped that off and brought it into this movie,
From
but instead
himself.
of it being instead of who was it? What?
From himself, because he directed Aliens, didn't he?
No, that was James Cameron who did
Okay.
Aliens 2. But basically, all I'm saying is he did that little trick again, but it wasn't aliens, it was Somalians. And it was Somalians moving closer and closer to the helicopter, you know what I mean? But I was going to say, just on the sort of the war on terror and after 9/11, like I think 3 years after this came out, you got the two fellas who do South Park made something called Team America World Police. Have you ever seen that?
I haven't seen it, but I've heard of it.
It's like a typical sort of Gen X kind of deconstruction. It's very obviously, it's like South Park, lewd, offensive humor. And it was this like complete sending up of everything to do with the war on terror. So like the libtards, they all got sort of parodied and kind of pilloried and mocked. But then so too did this idea that America is the world's policeman. And they even they did it with puppets. And they even did it where the characters in it are kind of like the people who are in Black Hawk Down. So you get this thing where you cannot help, once you've seen like the parody, when you see the movie which is played in earnest, like you can't help but like sort of be conscious. You can't put it's like when a glass shatters. You can't put it back together properly when things have been deconstructed that way, and it's always this kind of sort of Billy Bob. And I just want to get back to the farm in Alabama, and I sure do miss Wendy back on the farm in Alabama, and my old dog Bucky. As soon as I kill enough Somalians, maybe I'll get back there and go fishing in the creek, and I'll sink a few buds and like on Team America World Police, like that's the kind of stuff that the main characters would come out with. But it was but then you see like it is like that in the movies. And it's this kind of humor. It does destroy things for you. It does eat through things. Like if something's done in earnest, because there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being Billy Bob from Alabama and you want to get back to Wendy and old Bucky, your dog, and that's fine. But once it's kind of broken apart and laughed at, it's hard to take it seriously again. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I definitely see what you mean. I would have mixed feelings on that, because on the one hand, I guess like the kind of America fuck yeah patriotism was, well, it was really destructive. But at the other hand, I mean, it's also kind of damaging, at least from America's perspective. But it's also like, I mean, you can apply this to any country. Kind of this like nihilistic deconstruction of even what might be a kind of naive patriotism. It still is kind of destructive. And I wanted to get into that a bit, but I wanted to first talk about kind of how things have changed since 2001 and the film's release. So to recap for anyone, America went on not one but two wars in the Middle East following 9/11, in Afghanistan and in Iraq. America's reputation on the world stage was really good, and they had the world's sympathy following 9/11. Like I mentioned, that decade, toward following the end of the fall of the Soviet Union to 9/11, that was when America was pretty much the undisputed hegemon, and they had goodwill. They had a good reputation. People wanted to be like America. And after 9/11, they had the world's sympathy. It only took a couple of years for that sympathy to really evaporate. So America pretty much destroyed its reputation geopolitically with the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, maybe to a bit of a lesser extent. And it really failed to benefit the United States. Iraq was a huge expenditure. Thousands of American soldiers died. Iraq turned into this war-torn country rife with terrorism. Afghanistan eventually, after 20 years, which is the longest war in American history, it was retaken by the Taliban just after America's disastrous departure. If everyone remembers the scenes from 2 years ago of helicopters taking off from the embassies and people falling out of planes, and it ended in disaster, much like Somalia. Really, same story over again. Same with Libya. Same with every country that they try this with, and it's just something that I find so it's just such a toxic cycle, because not only is it wasteful, not only does the United States and the broader West, because let's not forget, Britain took part in Afghanistan and Iraq as well. Canada took part in Afghanistan, but not Iraq. But other countries have also been following the United States along on these journeys. So not only do you not gain anything out of it, but your enemies gain so much, because I feel like that like it's a win-win situation for it's basically a win-win situation for Zionists, and we can get into that a bit later, because on the one hand, Israel's geopolitical enemies, Iraq gets toppled, Afghanistan toppled, Syria almost, but not quite. It almost gets toppled. So they benefit geopolitically, but the United States is basically just left with this huge bill and a bunch of dead soldiers. But then on the flip side, white America also loses, and Jewish power wins at home as well, because they can form this cult. It furthers what Kevin McDonald calls the culture of critique, because now they have this narrative that, America is, and when they say America, they mean white Americans. And they say, there are just these horrible imperialists who are going off to invade Iraq because they want their oil, and they don't care about the poor brown people who are killed. But then, on the flip side, some fraud like Noam Chomsky. If there's one intellectual I have zero respect for, it's Noam Chomsky. On the flip side is, if they don't go on and do that, well, then he's going to say that, they clearly don't care about these poor third worlders who are being brutally murdered by their this dictator whatever in the third world. So not only is it this huge expenditure, not only did it damage the reputation of the United States, but it also even furthers the cultural attack of the enemies of Europe and of European people around the globe. It allows them to reframe this as a further kind of deconstruction of everything, and to further demoralize everyone. So now the war in Iraq can be blamed on rich white men who in Washington, who are these rich Christians who, with their Bibles and their guns, going off because they want oil, and it's just been it was basically a cakewalk for them to reshape it like that. When in reality, the people who are creating this narrative are the one who are benefiting from their state in the Middle East. So it's just this toxic cycle that white people can never win in this cycle.
Well, the weird thing is the war on terror, the left were against that. The Million Man March in London, that was all the left. It was the left who turned on Tony Blair because of his involvement with it all. And the way they framed it was that it was, as they would call it, Western imperialism. It was for capitalism. When it came to countries like Iraq, they would say they're only going in there with the oil because they've got the backing from the big oil companies, and then of course their thing with the American military industrial complex. So what they were saying was that it was like the white power structure, essentially, as they would see it, the American system.
And Zionism and Jewish interests are not mentioned at all in any of that stuff.
Well, some of the spicier leftists would do that. The sort of the George Galloway did, which is why in that era he's such a controversial figure. He got hauled before like the American Senate or whatever it was, and I don't even know how that was possible because he's not American. But so you did have like firebrand leftists who got unpersoned because they were talking about that. They were connecting some of the dots, but they would draw the line at calling it Zionism, Zionist power, and the connection to like the American deep state and whatnot. They would say like the Pentagon. But then like the Fox News, Bill O'Reilly and the American right had to carry the load of all of that. And what's interesting is that by the time you get into something more recent, like the Ukraine war, all of that's been like turned upside down, and it's weird because it's wrong to sort of then if you look at it, if you look at some of the rhetoric, it's kind of like, well, it's wrong to do nation building. Remember, we used to always call it nation building, winning the hearts and minds. And when that's overtly on behalf of contractors and all of that, as they would see it, then it's evil. But if you're doing it for like transsexuals and gay rights, then all of a sudden it's perfectly fine. Then all of a sudden American imperialism is fine if you're spreading like butt sex in Botswana. It all becomes perfectly justified. It's so bad. I mean, of the two, like I'd rather have like the greedy oil magnate kind of sitting there with his fat gut behind his desk, sort of quaffing brandy and rubbing his hands at how much money he's going to make out of conquering Iraq. Like, at least that would be straightforward and a little bit more. It's still pretty bad, but it's still better than butt sex in Botswana and like gay marriage in Afghanistan. I mean, in Afghanistan, they introduced. I mean, I did a video on this. It was like a response to counterpoints. And in Afghanistan, they had these classes where they were getting the local women, and they were showing them like modernist art of like toilets, like it would literally be a urinal, and they were like, this is what we class as art in our countries. And I just thought, what are they going to make of that? What are they going to make of this rainbow flag and Black Lives Matter and transsexualism? Because at least when somebody's invading your country to plunder it, everybody understands that it is what it is. But then it's what it's doing. All of the rainbow stuff, the woke stuff, is kind of reaffirming their belief in the great Satan. It goes beyond, like, people have invaded countries to plunder forever. But this goes beyond the like this the woke stuff. It is imperialistic. Just look what's happening in Ukraine, because they're getting all of BlackRock and all the corporate stuff as well. But the left have cheered it all on, but because they're getting the rainbow dildo stuff as well.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I made a video, which is still available on Odysee. It's called The Greatest Frame Game Ever. And I talked about this kind of divide that you'd have the American Fox News right. So you'd have Bill O'Reilly, Sean Hannity shilling for the invasion of Afghanistan, while you'd have the left talking about like how it's imperialism and evil white Christian men like George Bush going off and killing poor brown people. And basically, the problem you have is that it's a lose-lose, because from the perspective of the white majorities of any of these Western countries, both sides you lose on the foreign policy side. You lose because you don't get anything good out of that. Nothing comes of it. You just spend money and lose some lives. And well, from the left side, you basically just get your culture turned into this madhouse. You get this woke trash just shoved everywhere. And it allows. Well, the problem is this: it allows the woke, the whatever you want to call them. It allows wokeism to hold the moral high ground, while kind of allowing the what's perceived as the right to take the brunt of the criticism for doing the work of the woke. Do you see what I mean by that? So like, you see what I mean by that, right?
But you'll have to explain it.
Okay,
how the right's doing the work of the woke.
Well, as in, like, they're shilling for the war in Iraq, and then the bad things that happen with that gets blamed on the right. But then
Yes.
the actual results of this thing is, well, you're going to have, I mean, it's going to be Iraq as a disaster, but like the intended results is that Iraq is going to have like a gay pride parade and gay marriage and feminism and everything like that. So, the blame gets laid at the feet of the right and ultimately of white America, whereas none of the benefit, actually, they don't get any of the benefit of it. But what I see now, though, is that, like you mentioned, it seems like that narrative has flipped. Whereas you see with Ukraine now, it's important to note that Ukraine's more of like a proxy war for the American empire. They're not actually fighting in it actively, but they're providing arms. And yeah, it's the left, it's the progressives who are the most adamant about providing funding to Ukraine, and the right can play the side of let's stay out of this war. Let's kind of draw back on that and not fund another foreign war. So
go on then.
Well, yeah, I'd say that's much better of a position for the right to be in than it would have been 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I mean, another article that I wrote on Substack last year, I think it was, or the beginning of this year, was called "America's Toxic Rebrand," and it gets back to sort of what we were discussing with Black Hawk Down, because if in Black Hawk Down you get this positive vision where you can have Marty McFly, you can have Guns N' Roses, you can have Budweiser, and KFC, why not? And that's it. And you can have freedom and you can get rich, but that's kind of as far as it goes. Whereas that can appeal to somebody. That I think that is that's more subversive to traditional society. This kind of broad liberalism, capitalism, Rocky and Back to the Future and Nirvana and Madonna, that's actually more subversive to a culture than the rainbow flag is, because the rainbow flag woke stuff, the transsexualism and everything, that's actually packaged as an ideology with its own flag, instead of being the old American ideal. So what happens is that's so abrasive and it's so startling and at odds, and as an enemy ideology, that what that's going to do is make a country like, let's say, Iran, or some Middle Eastern country, African country, they're going to recognize that for what it is, which is an imperialist dogma, which is coming to enslave them. Whereas the other more traditional of Black Hawk Down, when you hear the way they speak, we want to give you burgers, we want to make you rich and make you free, and that's it. That's as far as it goes. But inherent in that was that it will be a positive vision, which, as an individual, you will benefit from. That eventually would have ate through their culture as well. But it wasn't packaged as being antagonistic, I mean, at the end of the day, like, they did have to bomb them into it and it didn't work. And to go back a little bit further, like the American kind of approach to all this is because they've been doing it a long time, mainly since World War II. And I think there's a sort of logic that, well, after World War II, because World War II informs everything about the West, so in its sort of morality. And after World War II, of course, they did a good job in this regard on West Germany and Japan. West Germany and Japan were success stories in that regard. West Germany became powerhouse of Europe, and then eventually, when after unification, it was just Germany. They lost a lot of land, like. But yet Germany then, during this time, boomed, bringing the East back up to scratch. And so they could say, well, it did work. They embraced it. They embraced capitalism and liberal democracy and freedom. Therefore, why can't Afghanistan? which so you can see the same with Japan. Japan did more or less. I think Japan retained more of its own character than Germany did, which was just completely sort of mind erased. But still, with Japan, they could say, well, it worked in Japan as well. So this is our way of doing things, a sort of soft imperialism. But then when you apply it to somebody with a much more backward or entrenched culture, it's just not going to take. It's not going to take root. They're going to, and then when you compound that problem with the more recent woke stuff, they're just going to see you as an out and out satanic enemy, which is where America is now, which is going to start and inform the politics, the geopolitics of the 21st century will be this problem. Well, I wanted to touch a little bit on the sort of the situation with the BRICS and Alexander Dugin, because this is now becoming a problem in my regard. I mean, I know, like people think, well, it's based Putin and everything. If you have a look at the rhetoric, you know when they were calling the Anglos, Putin would say the Anglos, and he would complain that the West was racist. And for people who were went all in on Putin being like their guy, it was kind of a bit embarrassing. But then also people were having to kind of excuse it or talk around it. And I think what happens when this kind of thinking when these all of these nations who are gradually sort of realizing they've got common cause, when they start and use that rhetoric which is anti-Western and anti-white, and it isn't a joke, and you can't just sort of brush that off anymore, because you've got a problem. We've got a problem, because then it's this kind of thinking, this ideology is internal in the form of the woke crap and the critical race theory stuff we've got, but it's also external. And you see it more and more with the rhetoric that they're using, which is kind of neo-Marxist when they're talking about this sort of anti-colonial stuff. It actually is like that.
I mean, how ironic is it that your enemy's best criticism is saying the exact same thing you say about yourself? So the weapon that, the BRIC, and I want to just be clear this. I mean, I don't support the BRICS or anything. I don't believe that any of the BRICS countries are based or anything like that. I need to make that clear because I know I'll be accused of that. And I'm no fan of Dugin. I think he's a horrible intellectual and a fraud and an idiot, basically. But just to make that clear, so I don't get accused of being a Dugin chill in the chat. But I mean, what I have to say though is that the argument that someone like Dugin or someone like China has done this, or South Africa, the arguments they use against the West are just repeating the West's own propaganda back to it. Because the West propaganda is, white people are racist. It was built on racism and slavery and imperialism and colonialism, and we owe the rest of the world everything. And then these other countries are just saying, just agreeing with that. So it's this horrible kind of situation to be in, that you're both under attack from abroad and from within.
If we look at it from their perspective, if you look at it from somebody in the Middle East or from Russia or China, and they look at Europe and America, leading the way. It is firstly, it is an empire, but also they can look back over the last few hundred years of history, and they can say that it has been this kind of mechanistic, capitalist, technological machine which has just really overrun the world to the degree where, and I know that I sound like a leftist here, but the thing is, this is what they're thinking. This is kind of like Dugan's take on this, and so all of these other countries have got common cause against this thing because it's just erasing all meaning in the world. Now the problem, so the problem is that's also like what kids are being taught in Western schools, because
exactly.
when you're kind of saturated in this and other people aren't, like black people, for example, in the West, then this is what they would call white privilege. This is what they really mean when you start to dig into the texts and stuff. So this raises a problem where the external sort of antagonistic ideology is going to be the same as what's internal, and I don't see how this is. So if the elites, the Western elites, the scum who run us, it seems to me they're gonna have to dial this back. They're gonna have to reformulate something, because I don't see otherwise all of these other people are just going to carry on. All you've got left is raw power, of course. There's still, but even that is starting to. We're in this situation now where it's like, can we produce enough bullets and missiles to supply both Ukraine and Israel and potentially Taiwan at the same time? And nobody seems to know. It looks like not,
because they've shipped all the industry overseas.
Over to China.
Yeah, over to China. Are you gonna buy artillery shells from China to sell it to provide Taiwan? I mean, I don't think they're going to sell those to you.
And part of that, I mean, obviously it would have been because they're all greedy scumbags, but there was probably an element of that, which is that, well, if we just let China get rich, they'll become like a liberal democracy who love us.
Yes, exactly. Like there's never this idea that, China, if we make China a rich country, they may use that wealth and power against us. I should also add that I don't actually believe that the BRICS countries are actually culturally motivated, or really anything that they have like any kind of religiosity or anything. I think that's more just like these countries wanting a bigger piece of the globalist pie. So I don't think that any of them are necessarily opposed to the materialism and the greed of, say, Western capitalism. I don't think they're actually opposed to that in any real way. I think it's more just that they want a bigger piece of the pie. So I mean, I've lived long enough. I've lived in Russia long enough to know that, it's not this traditional Christian society. It's basically, it's a kind of this like neoliberal oligarchy. So, it's more just them, the BRICS countries, wanting their own kind of share of the globalist pie, rather than an actual like spiritual struggle. I don't think that they're actually opposed to that. They're maybe just to the excesses. So maybe they don't want the transsexualism and everything, but the materialism, I think they still want that very much. I mean, you can look at China, how much Chinese people love to shop.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is why you end up in this weird situation where like Richard Spencer and Vaush have got the same takes on things, and it's because in the end, what it's like, well, you're going to look at the geopolitical situation, and then you just embrace it. You just double down on it and say, yeah, we are we are an empire. We're better than you, and I hope we'll keep expanding and we keep converting your people into these materialists. And you remember it was the same. It was the same earlier on with the European Union, where it could be this third force.
One thing about Vaush is that at least he's actually honest. At least he's a Trotskyite and a neoconservative at the same time. Which at least I'm being honest. At least he's being honest about it. That it's to spread this like filth to the entire world and to absorb them into it. The other thing to point out is that like in relation to Black Hawk Down, you like I mentioned earlier, you see this like extremely competent U.S. force at the time. They were in the middle of a disaster, but it was still a force to be reckoned with. I don't think the U.S. is going to be like that, because let us not forget that this woke crap, this has infested the U.S. military as well. So they now have these quotas to get more women and more non-whites into positions of authority at the expense of the actual combat effectiveness of this force. So, if that was a disaster back then, just imagine how pitifully this kind of operation would go today. The U.S. military is not nearly as capable as it would have been even at the beginning of the Iraq War. So
and then you've got the competency crisis on
yes,
top of that.
the competency crisis, and then it's not just the military; it's also it's the government as well. It's the corporations, it's everything.
It was something that was a statistic came out recently. It'll probably be the same for Britain as well. I'm not just having to go at America. It'll probably be the same for Britain. But it was like a certain percentage of the population under 25. Like basically your best social capital is going to be straight, young, healthy white men. And that's exactly what they're reducing, but also that so many of the young people are just kind of fat, they're unfit, where they can't get through the assault course. I mean, I'm as old as Gandalf's beard. I could probably still manage to get over an assault course, but there's kids now like 22-year-old, and they just can't climb over the ropes.
Yeah, I actually wrote a Substack post a couple months ago about when I was naive enough to consider joining the military back in, I think it was 2018. I did this like physical aptitude test, and it was pathetically easy. I just knew that this was designed for like a 40-year-old woman. Because I mean, if this is going to vet out your recruits, you're going to have a big problem because well, it just goes to show that that they cannot get. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah, it just goes to show that they cannot get the physical quality of recruits that would actually be required to have a fighting force to be reckoned with. Like it's just a disaster. I've read a lot about the Canadian Armed Forces, that they keep lowering the standards so that they can get more non-whites and more women into the military. And then on top of that, they're like telling their soldiers to put their pronouns in their bios. They're having these LGBT sensitivity courses. They're having these like workshops on how to deal with soldiers who have right-wing beliefs, and it's just absolutely antithetical to actually running a competent military. But these I mean, nothing. I don't see anything to suggest that any of these Western governments are gonna stray away from this path. And I also think that within the last couple of years, you do see that America's enemies are not as afraid of it as they used to be. So Russia invaded Ukraine. Now that Russia hasn't had an easy time in Ukraine. So who wins that conflict, it's still to be seen. So we still don't know how that's going to end. But they were confident enough to go ahead with it in the first place. So they weren't afraid of America enough to not go through with that. China may invade Taiwan. They have their eyes on it. Who knows when, if or when that will happen. But you do see that these countries are not as afraid of the United States as they would have been a couple of decades ago.
Yeah. I just wanted to address something I saw in the chat by Ludwig Mariendorf, because before we move on from this, and I'll give me final hot take. But sometimes I feel especially Anglos seem to react to Duggan negatively or perhaps misinterpret. I mean, where's the lie? Maybe he is for total Anglo death or not, but it was the Anglos that allowed, and then I'm going to assume he ran out. But basically what he's saying is that it would have been the Anglos who invented this, in cahoots with others, this sort of capitalist, technological, materialist age. Okay, let's just, for the sake of arguments, let's just say that if we think of that as being something like what Spengler would call the Faustian spirit, if it was in our nature to do that. As Europeans, we've imposed our will on the world because of specific characteristics about how we are. We've covered the place with roads, we've covered the place with machinery, which we've invented sciences which have smashed people's belief in religion and metaphysical truths. All of this can be laid at the foot of European man, and then they can say what you've created on Earth is hellish. Now, what do you then do if you say, well, you can argue, you can push back against that, and you can say, well, you're all comfortable. Everybody's getting fat. Everybody's got enough to eat. What are you moaning about? But the problem is, you sound like a bit of a leftist, where you fall back on like material goods. And so if they say like if the problem is this, I wouldn't say it's just Anglos, but even then, even if it is just the Anglo, what is it that the Anglo is supposed to do? Well, either you grovel and you get yourself full of white guilt, and you start sterilizing yourself. You go mad, and you know it's all this self-flagellation, or you double down on it. So this is what I'm saying. This is what's facing us, and it's what's going to have to face the elites as well. It seems to me. Otherwise, it's the end of Western civilization. Because there is truth to what they say. If you look at it, as always, the masses don't really have any say in this. It is the elites. It is people lathering the world with satellites. It's not just it's not just the Zionists. I mean, we're in cahoots with them, or at least the elites are. Some would say they're being led around by them. But the criticism is more than just the sort of zog. It's like it's the way technology has affected the world, for example. It's the way transportation systems have eaten into people's identities and everything about science. So if that is the criticism, and if let's just say modernity is a cancer, and that's being laid at your door by all of these people like Alexander Dugin and the BRICS and the rest of them, which appears more and more is where they're going. This is what people say they don't have anything in common. They do have this in common. And so you're left in this situation where you're going to have to double down on it and become a Western empire and dig in for the long haul, or you're going to have to just allow yourself to be overrun. But as it stands now, both things are happening. So, and I don't. It'll be the end. It'll be the end of Western civilization unless people start and come up with some hard-headed solutions to this problem.
Yeah, I mean, I do understand. I do understand the criticism. I think it is legitimate. Although I think like Dugin though is just postmodern nonsense. But I don't want to spend that much time on that. I did get one question from a super chat. It said, "How do you think young men in Britain and the U.S. would respond to a large scale war today?" I think that most would just refuse to take part in it, or they'd probably just get killed, or they'd form an incompetent fighting force, and I think it would just be a disaster. I don't think that these countries at all are prepared for any kind of large scale conflict. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. And the reason I don't is because of nuclear weapons. So I don't think that's actually going to happen. But let's imagine that it did. Well, first of all, what are they fighting for? They've been the nation has been deconstructed. They're atheists. They're not religious. Their material ways of life have evaporated. They're not even wealthy anymore. And they're all incompetent, and they're all fat, and they'll have mental illnesses. I just can't imagine it going any way other than it just being a total disaster. Either they won't be able to get anyone to join, or whatever fighting force they're able to field is just going to be a total wreck. That's how I think it would play out. Not that I think it's going to happen, but that's how I think it would go.
Yeah, I got a similar question which I wanted to get to.
Sure, go ahead.
By Hunky Haggis sent in bought me a pint on the coffee pot and said the best special forces in the world are the SAS, invented by a Scot. Why do you think this small island excels militarily, and why do you think that Westerners who have an individualistic society have the best armies? which would require a high level of organization. This seems a paradox. So on the one hand, where we've got individualistic societies, but on the other hand, we've also created the best armies, which seems to, it doesn't really jam together. What would your take on that be?
Well, I think it's just competence. First of all, while the West may have been more individualistic, remember we didn't always have this hyper individualism. Everyone's an individual, and the nation doesn't exist. So, Brits, Americans, Canadians, in past centuries, they may have lived a more individualistic way of life, but they still would have had a sense of homeland. They still would have had a sense of an actual country that they're fighting for, and an actual sense of sacrifice. But then, secondly, I just think that it's competence. Really, I just think that technologically they were the most advanced. They had the best methods, and maybe this kind of Anglo-empiricism is a very good way to structure. Maybe it's a very good way to structure a military and to come up with military tactics. I wouldn't be surprised if that was true. So that's what I'd say.
And I would pick up on what I've been saying about sort of the European spirit, because I was thinking about this question. I saw it earlier, and I was thinking about it when I was working in the garden, and I was thinking, what's interesting, if you read, about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, I ordered a beautiful copy of Sun Tzu's Art of War, which has got lovely pictures like Chinese art in it, and it's got aphorisms, and the pages are really nice and thick. It's a lovely book. When you read it, you'll see that he's setting down sort of as a sort of perennial truths about, well, this is a situation, this particular situation, this is what you have to do, and it will always be that way. So here is the truth of a strategy, and it will always be a truth of that strategy, and that's actually quite alien to the Western mindset. So if you read On War by von Clausewitz, it seems really dated. Now he's got some famous things in there about war being an extension of policy by other means and things like that. There's a fair bit of perennial knowledge in there, but really a lot of it is like how to maintain like a cavalry supply chain and of the importance of it and this kind of thing. It is military tactics of that age. And so what you find is that the way that European men do war, it is that it's not, I don't think it's so much about individualism or collectivism, but obviously there is like obedience, just obeying orders. There is individualism as well. I'll come back to that. But I think that the military doctrines are constantly updated and tested, and just so it becomes a technical process. Killing becomes a technical process beyond sort of chivalry, which is why we end up with like the trenches of World War One, because then it's like an efficient manner of killing, and all of this stuff about honor that just goes out. that just all goes out the window. It becomes let's just take the most efficient way of killing the enemy. So this is exactly what you see in Black Hawk Down. Is what they are is a finely tuned machine for killing. And the story really is that what happens when this finely tuned machine is kind of caught off guard, when it's put into when it's given a problem to deal with. And then it's about how the machine learns on the fly to adapt to the problem. And I think this is what European men do. They look objective at a problem in a situation or a process, and they are always looking for ways to make it better and improve it. And that's in everything that we've done, and it's also in the way that we kill and fight war. And another thing is there's actually, I think, more individualism than what people might think. So like the German army in World War II, they had actually, because that would be like where everybody was just sort of like robots would be the common perception. In actual fact, like they did this thing with the ranks, like each of the soldiers had a lot of agency, to the point where they could probably take over quite handily from at least, I think it was like 2 ranks above them or something like that. All of this and all of that ties in with a military doctrine, which is towards maximum efficiency. If you go to like sort of a Chinese army, like the sort of the soldier on the ground probably wouldn't have a clue what two ranks above him in the chain of command were actually doing, what their responsibilities were. Whereas in the European armies, they would have much more of an idea. So that there was actually more agency allowed. And then that kind of folds into the wider thing of it being a technical process, which is always being improved.
All right, so I think we can finish soon. Do you have any more takes on the movie or anything we spoke about before I finish?
Well, I was going to give one last sort of
go ahead. Go ahead, yeah.
Which is that to get back to what you see in Black Hawk Down, like I think there's something in it. I think there's something in the way that it's shot. Now, it reminded me when I was first sort of getting red pilled and watching political YouTube content way back, like 2009 or something. There was a video that did the rounds then, and it was a sort of it was like a Czech made nationalist propaganda video. Obviously, it'll be banned now. But it was called something like Europe at 2029 or something. And I think they actually took a lot of scenes from Black Hawk Down, but they also used various other. They'd spliced together lots of footage and news footage of chaos in Africa and the Middle East to make a 10-minute long, genuinely horrifying video, because they'd put it in the context of this being Europe in the near future. I think it was 2029. I can't remember now, but I found it that was like a major thing to me, because I thought I couldn't really refute the arguments. It was about demographics and things, and it was. I'm not even going to say like the text. There was no voiceover. It was just text on the screen, but it was essentially that. What you see in Black Hawk Down or something, that will be the future. That's going to be Europe in a generation or two from now. And I think there's something in that. I think there's something in it when we see the militias in Black Hawk Down and the way they are presented, that it strikes something in us where we think that that is the worst case scenario for the future of Europe. And unfortunately, it's not. It's by no means an impossibility. And I think that when leftists say things like we do have this latent fear of them, not them, like say the Somalians. I'm trying not to walk on any landmines here on YouTube. That they do have a point, but I think the reason they're stupid is because they don't see it either. Like it's like, isn't it obvious if you so drastically change your demographics and the racial makeup of the continent, that kind of horror show is at least a possibility. And I remember at the time, I was like, I used to always like troll the lefties. I was always getting banned on Facebook. This was when I was first kind of finding my feet. And I remember there was a lefty had just thought it was just ridiculous propaganda, like absolutely ridiculous. And I think like, well, we're 13 years later, and it's you just look at the streets, look at what's going on in the world. Look at how their identities are connected to what's going on in other parts of the world. And so that there's something in that. I think there's something in what you see with the Kalashnikovs, the complete indifference to death and suffering, the casual barbarism. And I think there's something in that terrifies the white man. And it's in Black Hawk Down in spades.
Yeah, and I think that the message to take away from both the movie and from that historical event is that I think that the future that we want is to have as little to do with that kind of society as possible, be it foreign adventurers abroad or bringing it into our countries at home. I think that the answer is that we want as I don't know about the portrayal of Somalis. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say I doubt that they have that much of a regard for human life, judging by the state of their society. And I'd say that the takeaway is that you want to have as little to do with that as possible. It's kind of a world of barbarism, and you have to in a way, well, in the present day, you have to erect barriers to keep it out of our world, really. So
and in order to avoid it, you may have to do some unpleasant things, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's unavoidable at this point. So, but if you don't do it, well, then you'll end up with that. So, I guess that's the takeaway from the film. Anything left to add before we finish?
No, I think next month's will be the 30th of our classic movies. So I'll try and rustle up something a bit different and a bit special for the
Sure.
big occasion.
Cool. All right. So thank you to everyone for listening tonight. We got really good numbers on this stream, which I'm happy with. I'm pretty happy about that. So, all right. Have a good night, and we will see you next time.